William Hogarth. William Hogarth FRSA, /Hogarth November 10, 1697, October 26, 1764, was an English painter, printmaker, pictorial satirist, social critic, and editorial cartoonist. His work ranged from realistic portraiture to comic strip-like series of pictures called modern moral subjects, perhaps best known being his moral series A Harlot's Progress, A Rake's Progress and Marriage à la Mode. Knowledge of his work is so pervasive that satirical political illustrations in this style are often referred to as Hogarthian. Hogarth was born in London to a lower middle-class family. In his youth he took up an apprenticeship where he specialized in engraving. His father underwent periods of mixed fortune, and was at one time imprisoned in lieu of outstanding debts, an event that is thought to have informed William's paintings and prints with a hard edge. Influenced by French and Italian painting and engraving, Hogarth's works are mostly satirical caricatures, sometimes bodily sexual, mostly of the first rank of realistic portraiture. They became widely popular and mass-produced via prints in his lifetime, and he was by far the most significant English artist of his generation. Charles Lamb deemed Hogarth's images to be books, filled with the teeming, fruitful, suggestive meaning of words. Other pictures we look at, his pictures we read. Early life. William Hogarth was born at Bartholomew Close in London to Richard Hogarth, a poor Latin school teacher and textbook writer, and Anne Gibbons. In his youth he was apprenticed to the engraver Ellis Gamble in Leicester Fields, where he learned to engrave trade cards and similar products. Young Hogarth also took a lively interest in the street life of the metropolis and the London fairs, and amused himself by sketching the characters he saw. Around the same time, his father, who had opened an unsuccessful Latin-speaking coffee house at St. John's Gate, was imprisoned for debt in Fleet Prison for 5 years. Hogarth never spoke of his father's imprisonment. Hogarth became a member of the Rose and Crown Club, with Peter Tillemans, George Vertue, Michael Dahl, and other artists and connoisseurs. Career. By April 1720, Hogarth was an engraver in his own right, at first engraving coats of arms, shop bills, and designing plates for booksellers. In 1727, he was hired by Joshua Morris, a tapestry worker, to prepare a design for the element of earth. Morris heard that he was an engraver, and no painter, and consequently declined the work when completed. Hogarth accordingly sued him for the money in the Westminster Court, where the case was decided in his favor on May 28, 1728. In 1757 he was appointed sergeant painter to the king. Early works. Early satirical works included an emblematical print on the South Sea Scheme, circa 1721, published 1724, about the disastrous stock market crash of 1720 known as the South Sea Bubble, in which many English people lost a great deal of money. In the bottom left corner, he shows Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish figures gambling, while in the middle there is a huge machine, like a merry-go-round, which people are boarding. At the top is a goat, written below which is whole ride. The people are scattered around the picture with a sense of disorder, while the progress of the well-dressed people towards the ride in the middle shows the foolishness of the crowd in buying stock in the South Sea Company, which spent more time issuing stock than anything else. Other early works include The Lottery, 1724, The Mystery of Masonry brought to light by the Gormagons, 1724, A Just View of the British Stage, 1724, Some Book Illustrations, and The Small Print Masquerades and Operas, 1724. The latter is a satire on contemporary follies, such as the masquerades of the Swiss impresario John James Heidegger, the popular Italian opera singers, John Rich's pantomimes at Lincoln's Inn Fields, and the exaggerated popularity of Lord Burlington's protégé, the architect and painter William Kent. He continued that theme in 1727, with the large masquerade ticket. In 1726 Hogarth prepared 12 large engravings for Samuel Butler's Hudibras. These he himself valued highly, and they are among his best book illustrations. In the following years he turned his attention to the production of small conversation pieces, i.e., groups in oil of full-length portraits from 12 to 15 inches, 300 to 380 millimeters, high. Among his efforts in oil between 1728 and 1732 were The Fontaine Family, circa 1730, The Assembly at Wanstead House, The House of Commons examining Bambridge, and several pictures of the chief actors in John Gay's popular The Beggar's Opera. One of his real-life subjects was Sarah Malcolm, whom he sketched 2 days before her execution. One of Hogarth's masterpieces of this period is the depiction of an amateur performance by children of John Dryden's The Indian Emperor, or The Conquest of Mexico, 1732–1735, at the home of John Conduit, Master of the Mint, in St. George's Street, Hanover Square. Hogarth's other works in the 1730s include A Midnight Modern Conversation, 1733, Southwark Fair, 1733, The Sleeping Congregation, 1736, Before and After, 1736, Scholars at a Lecture, 1736, The Company of Undertakers, Consultation of Quacks, 1736, The Distressed Poet, 1736, The Four Times of the Day, 1738, and Strolling Actresses Dressing in a Barn, 1738. He might also have printed Burlington Gate, 1731, evoked by Alexander Pope's epistle to Lord Burlington, and defending Lord Chandos, who is therein satirized. This print gave great offense, and was suppressed. However, modern authorities such as Ronald Paulson no longer attribute it to Hogarth. Moralizing art. Harlot's Progress and Rake's Progress. In 1731 Hogarth completed the earliest of his series of moral works, a body of work that led to significant recognition. The collection of 6 scenes was entitled A Harlot's Progress and appeared first as paintings, now lost, before being published as engravings. A Harlot's Progress depicts the fate of a country girl who begins prostituting. The 6 scenes are chronological, starting with a meeting with a bawd and ending with a funeral ceremony that follows the character's death from venereal disease. The inaugural series was an immediate success and was followed in 1733 to 1735 by the sequel A Rake's Progress. The second installment consisted of 8 pictures that depicted the reckless life of Tom Rakewell, the son of a rich merchant, who spends all of his money on luxurious living, services from prostitutes, and gambling. The character's life ultimately ends in Bethlehem Royal Hospital. The original paintings of A Harlot's Progress were destroyed in the fire at Fonthill House in 1755. The oil paintings of A Rake's Progress, 1733–34 are displayed in the gallery room at Sir John Soane's Museum, London, UK. When the success of A Harlot's Progress and A Rake's Progress resulted in numerous pirated reproductions by unscrupulous print sellers, Hogarth lobbied in Parliament for greater legal control over the reproduction of his and other artists' work. The result was the Engravers Copyright Act, known as Hogarth's Act, which became law on June 25, 1735 and was the first copyright law to deal with visual works as well as the first to recognize the authorial rights of an individual artist. Marriage à la mode. In 1743 to 1745, Hogarth painted the 6 pictures of Marriage à la mode, National Gallery, London, a pointed skewering of upper-class 18th-century society. This moralistic warning shows the miserable tragedy of an ill-considered marriage for money. This is regarded by many as his finest project and may be among his best-planned story serials. Marital ethics were the topic of much debate in 18th-century Britain. The many marriages of convenience and their attendant unhappiness came in for particular criticism, with a variety of authors taking the view that love was a much sounder basis for marriage. Hogarth here painted a satire, a genre that by definition has a moral point to convey, of a conventional marriage within the English upper class. All the paintings were engraved and the series achieved wide circulation in print form. The series, which is set in a classical interior, shows the story of the fashionable marriage of Viscount Squanderfield, the son of bankrupt Earl Squander, to the daughter of a wealthy but miserly city merchant, starting with the signing of a marriage contract at the Earl's mansion and ending with the murder of the son by his wife's lover and the suicide of the daughter after her lover is hanged at Tyburn for murdering her husband. William Makepeace Thackeray wrote, Industry and Idleness. In the 12 Prints of Industry and Idleness, 1747, Hogarth shows the progression in the lives of 2 apprentices, one of whom is dedicated and hard-working, while the other, who is idle, commits crime and is eventually executed. This shows the work ethic of Protestant England, where those who worked hard were rewarded, such as the industrious apprentice who becomes sheriff, Plate 8, alderman, Plate 10, and finally the Lord Mayor of London in the last plate in the series. The idle apprentice, who begins at play in the churchyard, Plate 3, holes up in a garret with a common prostitute after turning highwayman, Plate 7, and executed at Tyburn, Plate 11. The idle apprentice is sent to the gallows by the industrious apprentice himself. For each plate, there is at least one passage from the Bible at the bottom, most from the Book of Proverbs, such as for the first plate of Industry and Idleness, shown here, Proverbs ch:10:4 The hand of the diligent maketh rich. Vere Street and Gin Lane. Later prints of significance include his pictorial warning of the consequences of alcoholism in Beer Street and Gin Lane, 1751. Hogarth engraved Beer Street to show a happy city drinking the good beverage, English beer, in contrast to Gin Lane, in which the effects of drinking gin are shown. As a more potent liquor, gin caused more problems for society. People are shown as healthy, happy and prosperous in Beer Street, while in Gin Lane they are scrawny, lazy and careless. The woman at the front of Gin Lane, who lets her baby fall to its death, echoes the tale of Judith Dufour, who strangled her baby so she could sell its clothes for gin money. The prints were published in support of the Gin Act 1751. Hogarth's friend, the magistrate Henry Fielding, may have enlisted Hogarth to help with propaganda for the Gin Act. Vere Street and Gin Lane were issued shortly after his work and inquiry into the causes of the late increase of robbers, and related writings, and addressed the same issues. The 4 Stages of Cruelty. Other prints were his outcry against inhumanity in the 4 Stages of Cruelty, published February 21, 1751, in which Hogarth depicts the cruel treatment of animals which he saw around him and suggests what will happen to people who carry on in this manner. In the first picture there are scenes of torture of dogs, cats and other animals. The second shows one of the characters from the first painting, Tom Nero, has now become a coach driver, and his cruelty to his horse has caused it to break its leg. In the third painting Tom is shown as a murderer, with the woman he killed lying on the ground, while in the fourth, titled Reward of Cruelty, the murderer is shown being dissected by scientists after his execution. The method of execution, and the dissection, reflect the 1752 Act of Parliament allowing for the dissection of executed criminals who had been convicted for murder. Portraits. Hogarth was also a popular portrait painter. In 1745 he painted actor David Garrick as Richard III, for which he was paid £200, which was more, he wrote, than any English artist ever received for a single portrait. In 1746 a sketch of Simon Fraser, 11th Lord Lovat, afterwards beheaded on Tower Hill, had an exceptional success. In 1740 he created a truthful, vivid full-length portrait of his friend, the philanthropic Captain Coram for the Thomas Coram Foundation for Children, now in the Foundling Museum, and his unfinished oil sketch of a young fishwoman, entitled The Shrimp Girl, National Gallery, London, may be called masterpieces of British painting. There are also portraits of his wife and his 2 sisters, and of many other people, among them Bishop Hoadley and Bishop Herring. Historical subjects. For a long period of his life, Hogarth tried to achieve the status of history painter, but had no great success in this field. Biblical scenes. Examples of his history pictures are the Pool of Bethesda and the Good Samaritan, executed in 1736 to 1737 for St. Bartholomew's Hospital, Moses brought before Pharaoh's daughter, painted for the Foundling Hospital, 1747, formerly at the Thomas Coram Foundation for Children, now in the Foundling Museum, Paul before Felix, 1748, at Lincoln's Inn, and his altarpiece for St. Mary Redcliffe, Bristol, 1755-56. The Gate of Calais. The Gate of Calais, 1748, now in Tate Britain, was produced soon after his return from a visit to France. Horace Walpole wrote that Hogarth had run a great risk to go there since the Peace of Aix-la-Chapelle. Back home, he immediately executed a painting of the subject in which he unkindly represented his enemies, the Frenchmen, as cringing, emaciated and superstitious people, while an enormous sirloin of beef arrives, destined for the English and is a symbol of British prosperity and superiority. He claimed to have painted himself into the picture in the left corner sketching the gate, with a soldier's hand upon my shoulder, running him in. Other later works. Notable Hogarth engravings in the 1740s include The Enraged Musician, 1741, The 6 Prints of Marriage à la Mode, 1745, executed by French artists under Hogarth's inspection, and The Stagecoach or the Country Inn Yard, 1747. In 1745 Hogarth painted a self-portrait with his pug dog Trump, now also in Tate Britain, which shows him as a learned artist supported by volumes of Shakespeare, Milton, and Swift. In 1749, he represented the somewhat disorderly English troops on their march of the Guards to Finchley, formerly located in Thomas Coram Foundation for Children, now Foundling Museum. Others' works included his ingenious satire on false perspective, 1754, his satire on canvassing in his election series, 1755 to 1758, Now in Sir John Soane's museum, his ridicule of the English passion for cockfighting in the cockpit, 1759, his attack on Methodism and credulity, superstition, and fanaticism, 1762, his political anti-war satire in the Times, Plate I, 1762, and his pessimistic view of all things in Tailpiece, or the Bathos, 1764. Writing. Hogarth wrote and published his ideas of artistic design in his book The Analysis of Beauty, 1753. In it, he professes to define the principles of beauty and grace which he, a real child of Rococo, saw realized in serpentine lines, the line of beauty. By some of Hogarth's adherents, the book was praised as a fine deliverance upon aesthetics. By his enemies and rivals, its obscurities and minor errors were made the subject of endless ridicule and caricature. Painter and engraver of modern moral subjects. Hogarth lived in an age when artwork became increasingly commercialized, being viewed in shop windows, taverns, and public buildings, and sold in print shops. Old hierarchies broke down, and new forms began to flourish, the ballad opera, the bourgeois tragedy, and especially, a new form of fiction called the novel, with which authors such as Henry Fielding had great success. Therefore, by that time, Hogarth hit on a new idea: painting and engraving modern moral subjects. To treat my subjects as a dramatic writer, my picture was my stage, as he himself remarked in his manuscript notes. He drew from the highly moralizing Protestant tradition of Dutch genre painting, and the very vigorous satirical traditions of the English broadsheet and other types of popular print. In England, the fine arts had little comedy in them before Hogarth. His prints were expensive, and remained so until early 19th century reprints brought them to a wider audience. Parodic borrowings from old masters. When analyzing the work of the artist as a whole, Ronald Paulson says, in A Harlot's Progress, every single plate but one is based on Durer's images of the story of the Virgin and the story of the Passion. In other works, he parodies Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. According to Paulson, Hogarth is subverting the religious establishment and the orthodox belief in an immanent God who intervenes in the lives of people and produces miracles. Indeed, Hogarth was a deist, a believer in a God who created the universe but takes no direct hand in the lives of his creations. Thus, as a comic history painter, he often poked fun at the old-fashioned, beaten subjects of religious art in his paintings and prints. Hogarth also rejected Lord Shaftesbury's then-current ideal of the classical Greek male in favor of the living, breathing female. He said, "Who but a bigot, even to the antiques, will say that he has not seen faces and necks, hands and arms in living women, that even the Grecian Venus doth but coarsely imitate." Personal life. On March 23, 1729, Hogarth married Jane Thornhill, daughter of artist Sir James Thornhill. Hogarth was initiated as a Freemason before 1728 in the lodge at the Hand and Apple Tree Tavern, Little Queen Street, and later belonged to the Carrier Stone Lodge and the Grand Steward's Lodge. The latter still possesses the Hogarth jewel which Hogarth designed for the lodge's master to wear. Today the original is in storage and a replica is worn by the master of the lodge. Freemasonry was a theme in some of Hogarth's work, most notably Night, the fourth in the quartet of paintings, later released as engravings, collectively entitled The Four Times of the Day. His main home was in Leicester Square, then known as Leicester Fields, but he bought a country retreat in Chiswick in 1749, the house now known as Hogarth's House and preserved as a museum, and spent time there for the rest of his life. The Hogarths had no children, although they fostered foundling children. He was a founding governor of the Foundling Hospital. Among his friends and acquaintances were many English artists and satirists of the period, such as Francis Hayman, Henry Fielding, and Laurence Sterne. Death. Hogarth died in London on October 26, 1764 and was buried at St. Nicholas Church, Chiswick, London. His friend, actor David Garrick, composed the following inscription for his tombstone. Influence and reputation. Hogarth's works were a direct influence on John Collier, who was known as the Lancashire Hogarth. The spread of Hogarth's prints throughout Europe, together with the depiction of popular scenes from his prints and faked Hogarth prints, influenced continental book illustration through the 18th and early 19th centuries, especially in Germany and France. He also influenced many caricaturists of the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries. Hogarth's influence lives on today as artists continue to draw inspiration from his work. Hogarth's paintings and prints have provided the subject matter for several other works. For example, Gavin Gordon's 1935 ballet The Rake's Progress, to choreography by Ninette de Valois, was based directly on Hogarth's series of paintings of that title. Igor Stravinsky's 1951 opera The Rake's Progress, with libretto by W. H. Auden, was less literally inspired by the same series. Hogarth's engravings also inspired the BBC radio play The Midnight House by Jonathan Hall, based on the M.R. James ghost story The Mezzotint and first broadcast on BBC Radio 4 in 2006. Russell Banks' short story Indisposed is a fictional account of Hogarth's infidelity as told from the viewpoint of his wife, Jane. Hogarth was the lead character in Nick Dear's play The Art of Success, whilst he is played by Toby Jones in the 2006 television film A Harlot's Progress. Hogarth's house in Chiswick, West London, is now a museum. It abuts one of London's best-known road junctions, the Hogarth Roundabout. In 2014, both Hogarth's house and the Foundling Museum held special exhibitions to mark the 250th anniversary of his death. Selected works. Anniversary of his death. Selected works. Anniversary of his death. Selected works.